Everybody talks about Florida like it only moves in one direction. Newer, bigger, another condo tower, another subdivision, another stretch of coast that used to have a name and now has a brand. But drive far enough off the interstate, past where the franchise signs stop and the Spanish moss starts, and you will find places where that never happened. Not ghost towns, real people, where the last time the calendar truly mattered was somewhere between Eisenhower and the moon landing. The motel sign still glows in neon. The bait shop has not changed owners since your grandmother was young. And the main street looks like a photograph somebody forgot they took. And here is the part nobody tells you. Some of these towns did not get left behind. They watched the rest of Florida sell everything for the word newer, and they said no thanks. 10 Florida towns where the past never finished leaving. From the ones that froze by accident to the one that froze on purpose around a single species of shellfish. Subscribe if you are tired of the Florida that comes in a brochure. Here we show the state the way it actually is. Number 10. Flagler Beach. The last beach town on A1A that still has a neon motel sign and means it. Drive down A1A through most of Florida's Atlantic coast and the view is a wall of concrete and glass. High-rises blocking the ocean. Chain hotels blocking the high-rises. Traffic blocking the chain hotels. Then you hit Flagler Beach and the wall disappears. No high-rises, no resorts, no valet parking, just a wooden pier extending into the Atlantic the way it has for decades, attracting fishermen who measure their success in stories rather than social media posts. The motels along the highway are family-owned, single-story and lit by neon signs that have been buzzing in the salt air since before the interstate existed. Flagler Beach froze because it had the good luck of being between two places everyone was in a hurry to reach. Daytona to the north, Palm Coast to the south. The traffic passed through without stopping, and the developers chased the traffic. What was left behind was a beach town operating on the rhythm it learned in 1962 and never felt the need to update. The fried shrimp baskets come without fancy presentation or inflated prices. The surfers paddle out at sunrise. The retirees claim their chairs early. Everything moves at the speed of a place that decided, without ever holding a vote, that vacation speed was the only speed worth keeping. Here is the thing about Flagler Beach that locals will tell you if you sit long enough. The high-rises were proposed multiple times. The town said no, not once, repeatedly. And the neon signs that still glow along A1A are not nostalgia. They are a policy decision dressed up as a motel vacancy sign. Number 9. Gulfport, the art town that the rest of Tampa Bay forgot to gentrify. Gulfport sits on a small peninsula poking into Boca Ciega Bay, technically inside the St. Petersburg metro, geographically about 15 minutes from everything, and spiritually about 40 years behind all of it. The waterfront is lined with bungalows painted in colors that a homeowners association would reject on principle. The Tuesday night art walk fills the streets with painters selling from card tables, musicians playing for tips, and a crowd that treats browsing as a competitive sport played at half speed. Gulfport was never the fashionable part of Pinellas County. St. Pete Beach had the resorts. Clearwater had the tourists. Gulfport had a fishing pier, a small casino ballroom from the 1930s, and a downtown so compact you could throw a stone from one end to the other and hit a mural on the way. The artists moved in because the rent was cheap. The rent stayed cheap because nobody else wanted the zip code, and the artists, without quite meaning to, turned a forgotten waterfront neighborhood into one of the most distinctive small communities on the Gulf Coast. Here is what separates Gulfport from every other arts district in Florida. The artists are not performing, they live here. They take out the trash here. They argue with the city council about parking here. The galleries are not curated experiences, they are living rooms that happen to sell paintings. And the whole town runs on a frequency that the rest of Tampa Bay lost reception for sometime around 1998 and never bothered to tune back in. Number 8. Micanopy, the oldest inland town in Florida where the antique shops outnumber the residents. Micanopy sits under a canopy of live oaks draped in Spanish moss, so heavy it looks like the trees are wearing curtains. The entire town is on the National Register of Historic Places. Not a building, not a district. The town, population around 600, antique shops along Choloca Boulevard fill storefronts that have not changed their dimensions since the 1800s. The shopkeepers have time for conversation. They treat browsers like guests rather than transactions. And the whole place operates on a clock that ticks slower than yours and does not care about your schedule. Micanopy froze because it sat just far enough off the highway to be missed by the traffic that was busy building Gainesville into a university town 12 miles north. The students drove past, the developers drove past, the Century drove past, and Micanopy stayed under its oaks, selling Depression-era glass and mid-century furniture to people who drove the extra 12 miles because they heard a rumor that somewhere in Florida, a town still existed where the buildings were older than the air conditioning. The rumor was true. It is still true. Walk down Chaloka Boulevard and the only thing that tells you which decade you are in is the model year of the car parked at the curb. Remove the car and the century disappears with it. Hollywood has noticed. Scenes from Doc Hollywood were filmed here, which makes sense because a film crew that needed a small town frozen in the past discovered that building a set was unnecessary when the real thing was still standing 12 miles south of the university. Number 7. Quincy, the town where everybody bought Coca-Cola stock and then time stopped. 25 miles north of Tallahassee, in the panhandle town of Quincy, something happened in the early 20th century that does not happen in small towns. The local banker, Pat Monroe, started telling his customers to buy shares in a beverage company based in Atlanta. Coca-Cola, he said, buy it, hold it. They did. Farmers, shopkeepers, school teachers, people who had never owned a stock certificate in their lives, took their savings and bought Coca-Cola shares on the advice of a banker who was right for reasons nobody fully understood at the time. By the 1940s and 1950s, Quincy had more millionaires per capita than almost anywhere in Florida. A small panhandle town, population a few thousand, quietly sitting on a fortune built from a soft drink recipe and a banker's hunch. The money built mansions. It built a 36-block historic district with over 200 buildings. It built a downtown that looked like it belonged to a city 5 times the size, and then very quietly the town froze. The Coca-Cola generation aged. The children moved to Tallahassee and Jacksonville. The money stayed in the buildings, but the energy drifted away. What was left was a downtown district preserved not by intention, but by wealth that had nowhere to go. Nobody needed to tear anything down because nobody needed the land for anything new. Quincy did not freeze because it was poor. Quincy froze because it was rich at exactly the right time and then had no reason to change. The mansions are still standing, the historic district is still intact, and the Coca-Cola stock that built it all has been worth more every single year since the banker first said the words "buy it." A town that got rich on soda built itself a downtown and then sat inside it for 80 years waiting for the rest of Florida to catch up. Florida never did, and Quincy never seemed to mind. If you're enjoying this, hit like and subscribe. It is completely free, and we keep finding the Florida that never made it onto the brochures. Number 6. Lauderdale, by the sea. The beach town that chose pastel over concrete and never looked back. Drive 10 minutes north of Fort Lauderdale's glass and steel waterfront, and you arrive in a town that looks like Fort Lauderdale's memory of itself before the money showed up. Lauderdale by the Sea is a square mile of pastel-painted cottages, vintage motels, and family-owned restaurants that made a collective decision sometime around 1965 to stop competing with the city next door. No high-rises, no chain hotels, no resorts. The tallest thing on the skyline is a palm tree, and that is entirely by design. The homes date to the 1950s and 1960s, built during Florida's post-war boom when small beach getaways were the American dream. Owners have maintained them in a style that real estate agents would call charming and architects would call a time capsule. Every block is a different color combination. Every motel has a name instead of a number, and the staff knows yours by day 2. The beach is quieter than Fort Lauderdale's because the town limits development and the crowds thin accordingly. The snorkeling is better because the reef sits closer to shore. The walking is better because the town is compact enough that you do not need a car after you park. Lauderdale by the Sea froze on purpose. The town chose charm over commercialism and enforced the choice with zoning laws that have held for decades. Every year, someone proposes a taller building. Every year, the town says no. The pastel cottages are not accidents. They are a position, and the town has held that position since before the developer next door broke ground on the first tower. Number 5. Cedar Key. The island fishing village that the rest of Florida drove past for 60 years. Cedar Key sits on a cluster of small islands off the Gulf Coast, an hour southwest of Gainesville, at the end of a 2-lane road that does not go anywhere else. You do not pass through Cedar Key on your way to something. You arrive at it, and the fact that it is a dead end is the entire reason it still looks like 1962. The houses sit on stilts, the docks creak under your feet, the restaurants serve clams that were in the water that morning, and the menu is whatever came in. There are no chain restaurants, there are no chain anything. The economy runs on clamming, fishing, and the quiet conviction that updating would be a betrayal of whatever Cedar Key decided it was a long time ago. The town was nearly destroyed by Hurricane Idalia in 2023. Storm surge submerged the downtown. Homes were gutted. The rebuilding is ongoing. And the question of whether to rebuild differently or rebuild the same has divided the community the way only existential questions divide small towns, which is to say completely and permanently. The people who want to modernize say it is necessary. The people who want to rebuild exactly as it was say that changing Cedar Key to save it would mean the thing they saved is no longer Cedar Key. That argument is the most Cedar Key argument imaginable. A town debating whether survival is worth it if survival requires becoming something else. The stilted houses are going back up, the docks are being repaired, and the answer for now is the same answer Cedar Key has given to every question for 60 years. We will do it the way we have always done it. And if that is not good enough for the Century can keep driving. Number 4. Everglades City, the last frontier town in Florida where the swamp still sets the schedule. Everglades City sits at the edge of the 10,000 Islands, the western gateway to Everglades National Park, population around 400. It is the stone crab capital of the world, which sounds like a tourism slogan until you watch the boats come in at dawn and realize the town means it literally. The stone crab harvest is the economy. When the season opens in October, the town wakes up. When the season closes in May, the town does not exactly sleep, but it stops pretending to be awake. The streets flood during king tides. Alligators cross the road. The nearest full grocery store is in Naples, 40 minutes west, and the town's relationship with the law has historically been described by federal prosecutors as complicated, owing to a period in the 1980s when a significant portion of the local economy involved unloading bales of marijuana from boats arriving through the 10,000 Islands under cover of darkness. That era ended with a federal raid in 1983 that arrested roughly 1/3 of the adult male population. The town rebuilt its reputation slowly on stone crabs and ecotourism, but the stories from the smuggling years have become part of the local identity in the way that only genuinely dangerous history becomes charming once enough time has passed. Everglades City froze because the swamp would not allow it to change. You cannot build a subdivision in the Everglades. You cannot widen the roads without flooding the sawgrass. The national park boundary sits right against the town line, and the park does not negotiate. So the town remains what it has been since the 1950s. A handful of fish houses, a single main road, a school, a post office, and a swamp that is louder, wilder, and more in charge than anyone who lives next to it. Everglades City did not choose to stay frozen. The swamp chose for it. And the swamp has never been wrong about anything. Number 3. Cassadaga. The town that froze around a conversation with the dead in 1894 and has never changed the subject. 30 minutes north of Orlando, tucked between strip malls and retirement communities that look like they were designed by someone who had never seen a tree, there is a gated community of spiritualist mediums that has been operating without interruption since 1894. Cassadaga was founded by George Colby, a medium from New York who claimed a Native American spirit guide named Seneca led him to this specific patch of Florida scrubland and told him to build a camp. He did. It is still there. The Southern Cassadaga Spiritualist Camp Meeting Association is on the National Register of Historic Places. The cottages are Victorian. The mediums are certified. The services at the Cassadaga Spiritualist Church happen every Sunday and have happened every Sunday for 130 years. The town froze because it was built around a single idea, communication with the dead, and the dead do not update their preferences. The cottages look the same because the spirits reportedly do not care about renovations. The streets are quiet because loud noises interfere with readings. The entire aesthetic of the place is calibrated to a frequency that was set in the 1890s and has never been adjusted. Visitors describe the hotel at the edge of camp as having cold spots in rooms that should not have cold spots, a rocking chair that moves without being touched, and a guest book filled with entries from people who came for one night and left genuinely unsure about things they had been sure about their entire lives. The mediums do not defend themselves, they do not argue, they shrug. In Cassadaga, the dead are not a debate. They are the neighbors, and the town has been frozen around that conviction for 130 years without once feeling the need to explain itself to the Century happening outside the gate, half an hour from Mickey Mouse. A gated community of people who talk to the dead for a living. Unchanged since 1894, that is Florida. Number 2, Apalachicola, the town on the forgotten coast that froze because nobody could afford to change it, and nobody wanted to. Apalachicola sits at the end of a 2-lane highway, on a coast that Florida itself named Forgotten. The name is not marketing, it is a confession. The rest of the state forgot about this stretch of panhandle the way you forget about a drawer in the kitchen that still has batteries from 2004. It is there. You know it is there. You just never open it. The downtown is cotton warehouses from the 1830s converted into restaurants and galleries. The Dixie Theatre, built in 1912, still hosts live performances. The streets are quiet enough that you can hear the shrimp boats idling at the dock from 3 blocks away. And in the evening, the front porches fill with neighbors doing the thing that modern Florida has almost completely abandoned. Sitting, talking, watching the light change over the bay without reaching for a phone. Apalachicola froze because the economy that built it, cotton, timber, and oysters, Each rose and fell without ever being replaced by anything loud enough to warrant tearing the buildings down. The cotton money left. The buildings stayed. The timber money left. The buildings stayed. The oyster money is leaving right now, slowly, because of upstream water disputes with Georgia that have devastated the bay. And the buildings are still staying. The town has over 900 historic homes and structures. It looks like 1955 because 1955 was the last time enough money passed through to repaint anything. And even then, they painted it the same color. Here is the uncomfortable truth about Apalachicola that makes it the most honest entry on this list. The charm is a consequence of decline. The town is beautiful because it was too poor to modernize and too proud to demolish. Every restored storefront, every preserved Victorian home, every uninterrupted sightline down a live oak-lined street exists because the money to build something new never arrived. Apalachicola did not freeze on purpose. It froze because the economy walked away and the buildings were too well built to follow. And the result, against every expectation, is the most beautiful small town on the Gulf Coast, preserved not by policy but by poverty, and now loved by the very kind of people who would have changed it if they had arrived 50 years earlier. That is either ironic or perfect. In Apalachicola, it might be both. Number 1. The clam farmers of Cedar Key. The people who froze a town around a single shellfish on purpose. And number 1 is not a different town. It is a different version of a town that was already on this list. Because what is happening in Cedar Key right now is the purest version of the thing this entire countdown has been building toward. When the oyster industry collapsed and the fishing thinned out, the people of Cedar Key did not leave. They did not petition for a Walmart. They did not rezone for condos. They looked at the water and asked it what else it had. The answer was clams. Cedar Key is now the largest producer of farm-raised clams in the state of Florida. The industry was built from almost nothing by a handful of families who learned aquaculture the way their grandparents learned oystering, by getting in the water and figuring it out. The clam leases stretch across the shallow Gulf flats around the islands. The farmers wade out at low tide, pull bags of clams from submerged racks, and bring them to shore to be sorted, counted, and shipped. The clam industry did not modernize Cedar Key, it preserved it. The money is enough to keep the town alive, but not enough to attract developers. The work is physical and local, which means the people doing it live where they work, and have no interest in changing where they work into something they would not recognize. The clam farmers of Cedar Key made a choice that the other 9 towns on this list mostly did not get to make. They chose what to freeze around. Not a memory, not a building, not a nostalgia. A living industry that earns just enough to keep the lights on, and not $1 more than is needed to keep the rest of the world from noticing. That is the point of this entire list. The towns at the bottom froze because something happened to them. A hurricane, an economy, a highway that went the wrong direction. Cedar Key froze because the people who lived there looked at the rest of Florida, watched it sell the coastline inch by inch to the highest bidder, and decided that a clam was worth more than a condo. Stand on the dock at Cedar Key at sunset and you will hear it. The water lapping the stilts, the boats creaking at anchor, a town of 700 people holding perfectly still on purpose, around a shellfish in a state that cannot stop moving. It is somehow the most alive any town on this entire list has ever sounded, and every bit of it is built on the single decision to freeze, not by accident, but on purpose, around the one thing nobody else wanted badly enough to take. 10 towns, 10 completely different ways to stop a clock. A beach town that voted down the high-rises, an art village that Tampa Bay forgot. A town that got rich on Coca-Cola stock and sat inside the buildings the money built, a swamp town where the alligators set the zoning policy. A spiritualist camp that has been talking to the dead for 130 years without changing the subject. And a clam farming village that froze itself on purpose around a single shellfish because nobody there trusted the alternative. Every last one of them still standing while the rest of Florida keeps frantically trading the past for whatever is supposedly next. Like this video if a piece of you wants to disappear into one of them. Subscribe because there is a lot more Florida hiding just off the exit ramps. And we are only getting started.